My name is Maria Watkins, and this is a small presentation for my Russian history class at Sam Houston State University. And we'll be answering the question of what major point in Fyodor Dostoevsky's life influenced him to write his famous novel, Crime and Punishment. Disclaimer: before I start, I'd like to apologize for any mispronunciations of the names that are included in this presentation. To continue on, this presentation will consist of a small biography of Dostoevsky, a short summary of the novel, and at the end will be the discussion of what influenced him to write Crime and Punishment. Fyodor Dostoevsky was born November 11th in 1821 in Moscow, Russia, and passed away February 9th, 1881 in St. Petersburg. His parents were Maria Dostoevskaya and Mikhail Dostoevsky. Since his early childhood, he attended masses and visited churches and monasteries. He went to some of the best schools in Moscow, and since the age of 4 years old, his days were filled with studying. He constantly sought out the worst social groups in the district he lived in, even though his parents wished for him to be with the best in society. In 1837, he left school when his mother died of tuberculosis and entered an engineering institute in St. Petersburg. In 1849, he was arrested for being in a literary group that talked about banned books that were against Tsarist Russia, and he was arrested for treason. He was first sentenced to death by Nicholas I, and at the last moment the sentence was commuted. He was exiled for 10 years in Siberia instead. He ended up spending 4 years in Siberian prison camp and 6 years of exile doing military service. He was released in 1854. After that, no works of his were published until 1860. His first novel, though, was Poor Folk, which was published in 1846, but like I said, no works were published until 1860 after his Siberian exile. Crime and Punishment was published as a literary journal in 1866 and later published as a book a year later in 1867. It is supposedly one of the finest studies of psychopathology of guilt. The book starts off with an impoverished former student named Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov constructing the theory that extraordinary people have the right to transgress or commit a crime in order to give a new idea to humanity, or if they have something to offer to humanity. Raskolnikov believes that he is one of those extraordinary people. To prove his theory, he goes out and murders an old pawnbroker and starts to search through her possessions. As he's doing so, the pawnbroker's half-sister walks in on him, so he ends up murdering her as well. After the murders, the story goes through his emotions and elaborates on the struggles he's dealing with within his consciousness. The story also follows along with his struggle with trying not to draw suspicion towards himself, along with dealing with family troubles. His sister. This continues throughout the narrative until he finally turns himself in at the end. He's sentenced to 8 years of labor in Siberia. Later at the end of the narrative, after an illness, he eventually repents for the murders, realizing that happiness in the world is earned through suffering and not through a plan of existence. So after that summary, what major point in his life influenced Dostoevsky to write Crime and Punishment? After all the research, I've concluded to one point that stood out, and that was how the connection between each of his books after 1854 is his exile in Siberia. According to the analysis of Fyodor Dostoevsky's novels by Narsula Mambo and Dostoevsky's post-Siberian novels, he supplements his gallery of mistreated eccentrics with powerful, enigmatic, ethnically neutral supermen, highly intelligent loners whose philosophies allow simultaneously for self-sacrifice and murder. Raskolnikov is exactly one of those people. He was written after Dostoevsky's post-Siberian novels, and like it said, he is highly intelligent, and his philosophy allowed him to think that he had the right to murder someone or commit a crime. Dostoevsky even included the punishment for Raskolnikov's crime to be 8 years of labor and exile in Siberia. That is almost the amount of time he himself spent in Siberia. So I believe there is a small connection there as well. Another thing is a socio-psychological exploration of crime and punishment written by Chijioke Uesamba even states that the book is majorly influenced and based on the writer's terrifying experience with summary justice and the cruel penal system of Tsarist Russia. Like I said at the beginning of the presentation, was that Fyodor was arrested for treason for being in that literary group that talked about banned books. And so the capital punishment for treason, like in normal countries, is death. Well, it was commuted for Fyodor, and he was later sentenced to 10 years in Siberia. So I believe that that is also the connection, and many of his other books as well have to do with some point in his exile in Siberia that may influenced him to write his books. So, in conclusion, Siberia and his exile in it was the connection, and what influenced him to write Crime and Punishment. Thank you for your time.